And welcome back, guys, to the Garage, week number 4, season 1, Motion versus Logic. I'm Josiah.
And I'm James.
And this is the Garage. Yep. First, I would like to take a minute to thank one of our sponsors. Looking for more ways to get your message out? Whether you need to get your location noticed, increase the sale of your product or service, get more people to your events, increase enrollment, help people find their way around your facility, explain a program or policy, brand your environment, protect your employees and visitors, or tell your story in another way. Fast Signs can help. Fast Signs can help you reach your audience. Our sign and visual graphic experts ask the right questions to find out what you are trying to accomplish, understand the message you need to communicate, and determine the best place to put your message. Contact us at 951-695-327 or send us an email at 581@fastsigns.com to learn more. We look forward to speaking with you soon.
Link in the description will be provided.
Absolutely. Link in the description. Fast Signs, by the way, guys, highly recommend. Seriously. They offer great prices, and they're doing some work for us as well. So definitely shout out to Fast Signs. If you're in the Southern California area, definitely reach out to them if you need any of that work done.
Cool.
Okay, so here we are. Week number 4, James. 1 full month of the Garage in the books.
So let's get right into it. What is emotion and what is logic, and which one is better?
I mean, I think that is on a very, very broad spectrum. I think it's very much so determination based. I think both of them can offer a lot to bring to the table. I mean, think about how many times you've had a feeling or a quote unquote gut feeling that you wanted to go with, right? Even though logic is saying like, okay, this logically is a safe environment, but there's just something about it that just throws you off or tickles you the wrong way. You know what I'm saying? You're just like, nah, like this is sketch. You know what I mean?
Like a vibe.
Yeah, exactly like a vibe. What do you think?
So to answer your question, I think that gut feeling you're talking about has a little bit to do with logic. A little bit of logic, right? So with all of the past feelings that you've had, or I'd say information that you've acquired just to get to that point where you're getting that gut feeling, you know something's not normal, right? So I have to say, even though it's a feeling, there is some past information that has logic and emotions included into it that gave you that gut feeling, that gives you that vibe, right? That vibe that tells you something's wrong.
I disagree. I think that, I mean, if you can't correlate every situation to that. I.e., like, let's say I just met you, right? There's a vibe there. Kind of like the first night that we met, right? We had no prior knowledge on each other whatsoever, right? But there was this one moment, this one in particular moment, you said one word without any knowledge on you whatsoever. In fact, to give you guys some background information on that, James was getting ready to quit that job. And I had actually started with a multi-level marketing organization that I won't name. But I had just started with them, and I was going to meetings all the time, and so I was already exhausted. And James had come in, and he was talking about what his problems were and that sort of thing. And I'm not gonna lie, totally just brushed it off. I was just like, yeah, man, yeah, totally. And then he said one word, business, and then I instantly flipped the switch. Right, my switch flipped, and it could have been, James. It literally could have been you talking about how much you hate business, or business that you'd try to start and it failed, and now you absolutely despise business. See, I didn't know because I didn't have any logic. But it was just an instant vibe. It was an instant connection. It was a gut feeling.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
I do agree with you a little bit, right? But, well, I will admit that this gut feeling isn't always pertaining to logic all the time, right? Because that gut feeling is emotions in a way, right? That feeling, right? But say you're out in the streets, you meet this guy, and he's giving you these really stalkerish creeper vibes, right? Well, how do you get that? And I have to say that somewhere in your past, you've met someone that has this similar vibe to it, and then the way they were talking to you, the way they portrayed themselves, or you got it from watching TV, and then maybe it's from your experiences with talking to people. Hey, you know what? I met this guy. He's so weird. He's like just looking at me. He's talking to me. He's not even really engaging with me. He's just looking at me, staring at me. And it's just all weird and stuff, right? So because of those past experiences, I would have to say that maybe it had something to do with you accumulating that information, and then now in the present day, when you re-encounter that experience, you get that gut feeling, right? Does it make sense?
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. I think another large part in that is probably going to be in the environment or culture you grew up in. You know what I mean? I mean, if you grew up in a culture or environment, right, like the suburbs or, you know, a decent neighborhood, right? I mean, you see people walking all the time at night, you know, and you don't think anything of it, right? As opposed to if you grow up in like even a not so great neighborhood. I'm not even saying a bad neighborhood, but like a neighborhood where you don't see a lot of people out at night. I think that more so than like having an experience or necessarily seeing something on TV, I think common sense just plays a huge role. Now, if we're talking you're in the street and you're in downtown LA, right, and there's this homeless guy or a guy who looks homeless, right? I mean, there are two things that run through your mind. Okay, I'm going to give this guy change, or I'm going to ignore this guy because he potentially looks like a threat, right? I think the common sense rule kind of just applies more so than the experience rule, or the watched something on TV. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Just common sense. Like, are you out during the day or are you out during the night? Are you in downtown LA or are you in Menifee, California, right? Or San Clemente, California, or Temecula, California. I think those things play more of a factor rather than the experience. Now, obviously, if you've had traumatic experience, I think that plays a major role. But I think it would be almost illogical to say that every time that happens, it's going to be based off of a trauma event. That would be saying something like all people have been through a traumatic event or seen something on TV, which they dictate how they approach that situation. I think it more so plays into the environment rather than experience. What do you think?
I could definitely see that. Because if you have no past experiences, or if you were never taught to act a certain way, right, with certain situations, then obviously you're not going to necessarily know how to act. So like with what you were saying is, well, if I have had bad experiences, right? So say you went up and tried to give this homeless guy some change, and then next thing you know, he pulls a knife on you and tries to rob you. You're going to definitely avoid that situation in the future.
Probably, yeah.
You're never going to give that next homeless dude the benefit of the doubt because you're afraid of getting stabbed to death, right? And I think that definitely does play a role. But say you've never had that experience and you meet some homeless guy and you're like, you know what? I'm going to give this guy some change. You do it, and nothing bad ever happens to you. Just thanks you and you're on your way, right?
Yeah.
So I definitely do agree with that.
Yeah, that's just what I'm basing mine off of. I mean, I definitely still see your point where you see something on TV like a pre-existing idea or ideal, or this is the way things happen, so this is the way I'm going to come about it.
So I guess my next question would probably be, so which one triumphs the other? Emotion or logic in that situation, right? So say you're walking and then you see that homeless dude and then he needs some money, but then your emotions will probably play in a way and say, you know what, he's a human being, I gotta help him, I'm gonna give him change. Or the logical side would probably be something more along the lines of, you know what, I probably would have to avoid him just because I don't know if he's a threat or not. But obviously in a little bit, that kind of play a little bit into fear though too. But the logical side would probably be to keep yourself safe and avoid problems at all costs.
I think that it's either one or the other way of thinking is completely false. I think that it can be more than just, okay, am I safe or am I not safe? I mean, when I see a homeless person, right, I'm like, okay, do I have enough money to give this person right now? Or, okay, do I actually have dollar bills in my pocket? Like, can I actually give him money? You know what I'm saying? I don't necessarily think, okay, am I safe or not? I'm not saying that nobody thinks that way, but I think when you're making this argument or talking about this specific example, right, you can't just look at it as, am I safe or am I not safe? You know what I'm saying? There's so many more things that go through the brain rather than just those two options.
You are absolutely right. But my point with that is just your reasoning and your emotions behind it, right? It could be like with whatever example or whatever variable you wanted to throw out there. It could have been, do I have any dollar bills on me? Do I have spare change to actually support this guy a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. Even though I'm not in the best financial situation myself. So say if you are not in the best financial situation yourself, and then you still decide to give this guy some money, then logically it wouldn't make as much sense because you need that money I wouldn't say just as much as this guy because this guy's homeless, but you need that money so you don't end up in this guy's position. Does that make sense? I guess in a way, it really does depend on so many variables and so many perspectives and so many individual values.
Yeah, no, totally. I was just not thinking. I was like, because now I'm going through my head every single situation, right? And just because it doesn't make logical sense to you, I mean, in the Christian Bible, right? It talks about giving, or I forgot the exact verse, so I apologize. So this is not exactly scripture. So absolutely in the comments if you want to like tear me apart because I got this wrong, then absolutely go for it. But it does say something along the lines of like putting clothes on your neighbor's back, giving to the less fortunate, right? It also talks about tithing, right? Where you give 10% of your income, and that's debated, but it is essentially 10% even if you can't afford it, right? You're still supposed to give 10% of your income. So to a Christian, it makes logical sense even if they can't necessarily afford it at that time because it says to. So with their brain, the way their logic works is, okay, like, am I a Christian first or am I a provider first for my family? So logically to them, that makes sense. They can logically make sense of that without it being emotional. Do you know what I mean? So there are just so many variables. It's so hard to distinguish, okay, like in this one specific situation, is it more logical or emotional? Or, you know what I mean? Which one should be the deciding factor? You know what I mean? There's just so many different variables. It makes it almost impossible to choose one, you know?
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay. So emotions and logic, they are so sensitive in a way, right? You just can't necessarily pick which one is more important and which one is not, right?
I mean, yeah, but I think, again, that is dependent on the conversation. Now, if we're talking about decision making, I think that they both play an equal, or not necessarily equal, but they both play such a heavily role, and there's so many different perspectives that you can look at one specific situation from, that I think it's impossible to say, okay, emotion matters more in decision making or logic makes more sense in decision making. I think they both play such a there's just so many different variables that you can look at it with that it makes it impossible to say, okay, in decision making, emotions are more of a deciding factor than logic, because there's just so many different variables you can look at decision making with. You know what I mean? I mean, again, right? If you're a leader, right, and you are, let's say, a company commander of uniform service, you actually have to make logical decisions based off of other people's emotions, right? Like, okay, are we going to make our Marines hike directly after the rifle range, right? You have to take emotions into consideration when making these logical decisions, right? What do you think?
I don't know. Provide more.
Okay, so let's say I'm a company commander, right? Which I'm not, but if I was, right? And we had to train with the rifle range, right? But the month is closing in, and the month is coming to an end, and normally we try to hike, let's say 20 miles once a month, right? Which is not out of reality for the Marine Corps. at least coming from the infantry side, right? That's not out of the spectrum of reality. So let's say it's closing in the month, and then it's the last week in the month, and that month we have the rifle range, but normally Fridays are a very short day. It's just police calling, right? So let's say right after police calling, we have to get this hike in.
Hold up. What's police calling?
Oh, yeah. So my bad. For anyone who doesn't know, whenever you go to a rifle range, right, where you shoot rifles, you normally wait until the end of the week because the rifle range normally lasts a week, Monday through Friday. And a police call is basically Friday morning, everyone gets up and goes and picks up all the empty shells or bullet casings or whatever you want to call them, right? So anyway, we're closing in to the end of the week, right? And to a company commander, right, which is not the highest level by any means, right? This is just a company, right? Above a company commander, you have a regiment commander, right? Now, actually, I misspoke. So it goes from I was a part of the regiment, but in a normal situation, right, where when I was in the infantry, it went from company commander to battalion commander, right? So the battalion commander says at least once a month you're going to hike your Marines, right? Your Marines are going to hike 20 miles, right? So Friday morning comes, you police call. Now you have a decision to make. You have, okay, am I going to get my ass chewed apart from the battalion commander, or am I going to hike my Marines? If I do hike my Marines, what is it going to do to the morale? So you have a decision to make, right, come Friday morning. Or let's say Monday morning, you have that decision. Okay, am I going to hike my Marines Friday morning right after a rifle range? And if I do that, what are the repercussions? What is that going to do to the morale of the Marines? Are they going to work as hard the following week? Because they got absolutely ass put to the grass for an entire week, and then on Friday we made them do a 20-mile hike right after, an exercise, right? Those are the kind of decisions where I'm talking about, right? Where now you have to incorporate not only logic, but you have to take into consideration how it's going to affect, and it could be looked at, even if it's not a company commander, it could be looked at as an executive, it could be looked at as a manager of a restaurant, an executive of a huge business, right? Or a CEO of one of the biggest businesses in the world, right? You have to think, okay, how is this going to emotionally affect my consumer, my employees, my Marines, all of that?
Well, I would have to say that if it's a requirement and if it's part of your job and you're supposed to do that, then you're supposed to do that, even with a regular job, right? You're expected to accomplish and do certain things, and if you don't do it, then you're not fulfilling your requirement. Now, if you're going to consider your emotions or the morale of the employees, right, then that's making the decision based off of emotions and not logic, because the logic in this scenario would be to do what you're supposed to do and just get it done, regardless of how people feel. Because a lot of people hate their jobs, I'll tell you that. But people still have to come into work and do their work because to make sense, because they have to pay their bills, right?
Right.
They have to do whatever they got to do, and whatever the work entails, it's logical sense because it's what they're supposed to do. It's in their job application when they sign up. Does that make sense?
Right. Now, I have to disagree. I think that your definition, right, I think is the difference between a leader and a boss, right? I think a leader is going to take into consideration what it does to his employees, and I don't consider that emotional. I wouldn't consider it an emotional decision. If, example, again, and I'm gonna dial it back to the military just because that's what I know, right? So if you have any questions, please ask me, right? So let's say, okay, after that week, the next week, you have another training exercise, right? Now, in that training exercise, you understand that the battalion commander, your boss, is going to be there and observing the exercise, right?
Okay.
So that's why I'm saying that making a decision which is based off of other people's emotions is not emotional. It would be logical. Because at the end of that week, if you do make them hike, the next week when that training exercise happens, which normally does happen, that's not out of the norm, again, to happen, where you have exercise after exercise, you want your Marines to perform. You want your Marines to put out, right? You want to look good in front of the battalion commander. But their morale is now destroyed because they hate you, right? Which I'm not against hating your boss. I think the majority of people could agree that, okay, my boss sucks, or I don't like my boss. I know some people do, but I would say for the majority of the people, you're not supposed to be friends with your boss or best friends with your boss. I disagree with that. But you have to make that decision again, and it goes weeks and weeks back before you even knew you had the range, right? Okay, I understand that we're closing in to the end of the month. I know I need to hike my Marines. I know the range is coming up. We can hike Friday morning, but we also have a training exercise the following week where the battalion commander is going to be observing it. If they perform crappy, you again look bad.
Okay.
So do you bite the bullet Friday morning and tell the battalion commander, hey, we're not hiking this month. We'll get it done the second week of the month? Or do you take the chance and say, we're going to hike them and then expect them to perform 100% emotionally and logically come Monday morning when that training exercise happens? I wouldn't consider that emotional at all. I would consider that extremely strategic.
Okay.
And logic-based.
Well, I don't know how that works, but based off of your experience, right? If that's the way it works with you, then that's the way it works with you. But in many cases, right? Say that battalion commander, right? Mm-hmm. Battalion commander is above the what?
Company commander.
Okay. If that battalion commander is in charge of that company commander, and it's on that company commander to do things, and he's expected to do it, and if he doesn't do it, what does that look like on the company commander? The battalion commander is the next boss, and he probably doesn't give a shit, honestly. So what's probably going to happen if the company commander doesn't do what he says? He might get fired or something, right?
It doesn't work like that, but sure.
Sure, right. So say he gets fired. Say he gets fired, and then no one gets replaced. But my point is, he has to do it. The next boss doesn't really care. So say in a gaming company, right?
Okay.
You're designing games. There's a due date. There's, say, a boss, and then there's I don't know what's above a manager, but I'm just gonna say boss as the highest, and then there's a manager, and then there's employees, right? The boss is expecting the manager to get these employees to finish this game and produce it by a certain date. Now, if the manager doesn't accomplish it, doesn't get his employees to complete the task, then the manager is going to get yelled at by the boss.
Right.
And then that manager is most likely going to get fired. Could get fired, right?
Potentially.
With that being said, normally the middle boss doesn't really have a final say in what he wants to do. However, he can still pick and choose and make decisions based off of what he thinks is right. But if that's the case, then he's going against what the boss is trying to say. But I guess a way to mitigate that problem is to have the manager talk to the boss. But we're not going there. We're talking about what makes sense, and
we're kind of driving away from how this entire portion of the conversation started, which is, are you making the decision logically or emotionally based off of other people's emotions, right? If as a leader or as a manager, whatever you want to say, I still disagree with your statement. I mean, we could go down the rabbit hole and continue to go down the rabbit hole for a while because that's what we can do, right? But ultimately, my statement stands as as a leader, as somebody in charge of a group of people or groups of people, right? You have to make decisions that logically make sense based on other people's feelings. And I would consider that logical.
So at this point, you're incorporating both.
You would have to. I think most great leaders do.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can see that. Here's my thought on that. If you can incorporate emotion and logic into a decision, then I say go for it, right? But I probably have to say that your example was a little bit extreme just because it, in a way, incorporated emotion and logic at the same time. But I'm talking about what is more powerful, right? What is more impact? Okay, I know emotions are more impactful to people because everybody has emotions, right? But I'm talking about stuff that makes sense and stuff that will better you in the long run, right? I'm not talking about being robot, but that's essentially kind of what I'm talking about, just a little bit. say you're out and about and you're trying to get an ice cream cone, right? But you know you shouldn't because you're trying to watch your diet. But then your emotions, your cravings, your need, and you're like, you know what? I know if I have this ice cream cone right now, I'll feel a lot happier. And you indulge and you buy that ice cream cone. You gave into your emotions. There was no logic into that because you made a decision based off of emotions. Whereas if you made a decision based off of logic, which is, no, I'm not going to get that ice cream cone. I'm just going to go eat a salad or go on a run or something, right? That would make the most sense. Now, I would have to say that whatever makes sense to the individual themselves, the emotions or the logic that goes behind it, the question you would have to ask yourself is, what is your objective? If your objective is more emotion based, then I'd say go ahead, use emotions, right? But then in a way, wouldn't that kind of have a little logic into that as well? For example, say if you're trying to make people, you know, like those TV commercials, they're trying to get you to donate, and you see that puppy commercial, right? And then people get all emotional and stuff, and then they give into their emotion. In the arms of an angel. Yeah, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
They're using the emotions to get people to donate. Now that makes sense in a business perspective in a way because you're appealing to the emotions of other people to get them to donate to a cause.
Right.
So there's logic and there's emotions into that as well. But if I had to say which one, it really does depend on your objective. And I really do think that based off of what your objective is, you could use either emotion or logic in this case.
Well, let me ask you this. Which one do you think? Because one of your points that you hit on before you kind of were talking about what you were talking about, one of the key questions you asked is which one is more powerful? Which one do you think is more powerful?
Powerful in terms of what?
More effective.
More effective in terms of what?
Anything. Literally anything.
You have to be more specific because there are a couple of thoughts running through my mind right now.
Well, then give me an example of what you mean.
Okay. So emotions is by far more powerful than logic. If you are trying to get somebody to do something or persuade someone to do something, I know as a matter of fact that emotions will play a bigger role in getting you, the individual, to do something, right?
Yeah.
Whereas logic is, yeah, it makes sense, but not a lot of people are going to do it. Like, so say you're trying to lead a healthy lifestyle, right? Obviously, logically, you're supposed to eat certain types of food. You're supposed to work out. You're supposed to drink lots of water. But not a lot of people do that because people cave into emotions a lot more. And therefore, I believe that emotions are powerful, more powerful than logic. Not everybody follows the logical side of it, right? Obviously, it depends on your objective. Obviously, if you don't care about being healthy, right? And all you care about is being happy and you just want to live in the moment, then by all means, give into your emotions. Do what you want to do, right? As long as you're not hurting anybody else, I really don't care. But those are my thoughts on it.
I think the mind is a very tricky thing. As somebody who has been in that situation, I think most people have been in that situation where they're like, oh man, I probably shouldn't eat this. And then they do these mental gymnastics to make logical sense of why they should do that thing. Like an example would be like, okay, I decide I want to lead a healthier lifestyle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say I do it for a few days, right? 4 or 5 days, right? I've been ran every single day, and all of a sudden I get this craving for ice cream. Logically, I could say, oh man, well, for the past 4 days, I've done really well. You know what I mean? Like, if I eat this ice cream right now, like, what harm could it possibly do, right? And that makes logical sense in a way, right? I mean, obviously, in the long run, it doesn't because you double back and then you fall back into old ways. I mean, if you can really stick to that, though, right? If that person can really say, okay, for the past 4 days, I've eaten super clean, drank tons of water, and ran every single day. I want ice cream right now, and I think that's okay. And if they can really stick to that logic and be like, okay, this is the only time I'm going to do it for another 4 days or 5 days, I think that does make logical sense. However, I think I'd be silly to say that is normally the case. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't think it's logical to give in to even at one time, right? But it is okay to say, you know what? I think I deserve it. Obviously, the emotions taking over a little bit, but I'd say if you're on a roll for like say a week, right? I mean, why not treat yourself a little bit? Because
I mean, you also got to look at like, especially when it comes to foods. I mean, we're talking about addictions. You know what I mean? People are addicted to food. That's just the case. You know what I mean? They're addicted to carbs and they're addicted to sugar. Sugar being, I think, don't quote me on this, but if you look it up, I think sugar and caffeine, or caffeine and sugar, are about like the third or fourth most addictive drug in the world. Like, I'm talking about compared to like meth and shit, right? You know what I mean? Like, it's really highly addictive, and that's a whole nother topic for another day. But I mean, we're talking about heavy addiction. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I don't really think that using your example of treating yourself to fatty foods is a relatively good example, because you're talking about, again, one of the most addictive substances on the face of the planet.
All right, before we move on to our next topic, I just thought about this question, right? If you had to choose between saving one family member that you love very much or 1,000 people, which one would you choose and why?
Damn, James, put me on the spot.
Absolutely.
Which family member?
I said one you love, right?
One that I love. Like, okay, that way we're not naming any. Okay.
Would you rather save that one family member, or would you rather save 1,000 people you don't know?
And this kind of is interesting, because I could definitely make logical sense of that, right? What if I save 1,000 people but let my family member die, right? But let's say or let's not use me as the example, right? Let's just use somebody else, right? Let's say there's this one guy, right? And he has to make that decision, right? Well, logically, I can think from his perspective. I'd be like, okay, if I allow my family member to die, then I could get into a state of depression, and then I'm not going to be as effective to the world as I possibly could be, right? Let's say you fall into a very deep depression, right? Where you do not recover from, and you do not then accomplish, let's say, saving 10,000 people. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? So those are kind of like the mental gymnastics. Me personally, I think if I'm talking about somebody that I loved, absolutely loved, which it's not many, right? I'd probably take my family member.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I definitely liked how you were going a little off about depression and saving family members and doing other things, right? And it really does tie into the question, well, it depends, right?
Exactly.
So if you're trying to save that one family member, say that family member is already doing good and is already starting humanitarian events around the world and projects, right?
Exactly, variables.
And that person is already making more of a difference than those 1,000 random people, right? Then would it be better to save that one individual?
Exactly. Yep.
Just so that way they can save more than that 1,000 individuals? Or would you take that chance and then try to save that 1,000 individuals because that one individual family member that you love is not doing so much of a difference in the world or themselves? But then it depends on what your objective is.
Okay, but before we go on this rabbit hole, I have to kind of stop it there, because if we're using logical thought, you're using an extreme and highly unlikely scenario to make a point, which I think is faulty thinking. I think you're using an extreme, like not even like a real, like so far off the spectrum of reality that the only thing that it truly questions is your own ethics and not necessarily emotion versus logic.
Yes. So we'll move on from it. But my question with that will probably go back to, what is your objective? What are you trying to accomplish? Whether it's a personal reason or an external reason, right? Mm-hmm. Whatever your objective is, you decide based off of what your objective is.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So moving into arguments. Okay. I think this is not a good... I don't think this is good for us, because if we're talking about arguments, every single time I'm going to say, show me the fucking data. Every single time. You know what I mean? Like, show me the data. Show me the numbers. Show me the facts. Like, I mean, this is something I was going to bring up. I'm gonna briefly kind of skim over it. I was having a conversation at work today, right? And we were talking about transgenders. All right. I was in the process of getting out of the military, or I am in the process of getting out of the military, and on the page, right, where you're filling out all your information to get out of the military, it asks a question, and it says birthed gender and preferred gender. And I looked at that and I was like, dude, what? And I know this is probably going to be an unpopular, right, thing to say, right? But I stand behind what I believe, right? And I really do. And if you want to, comment and tell me how much of a piece of shit I am, then, feel free. But this is and I don't have anything against transgenders or homosexuality or anything like that. But here's my thing, right? If you are asking me to alter my reality and alter how I come about the world based off of how you feel or how you think you are, because you cannot alter or change basic fundamental biology. You just can't do it, right? There's nothing in the world that it's the same argument that I saw in this one podcast where he said, why can't you be 60? That was his argument. He's like, okay, if you want to be, if a male wants to believe that he's a female, why can't he also say he's 60 years old and legally change it? Right? Or why don't we allow pedophiles to, like, a 30-year-old man say he's 12 years old so he can then go have sex with another 13-year-old? You know what I'm saying? Like, that shit matters, And so that's why you can't alter basic biology. It's just fundamentally incorrect, right? And again, if I'm out in public and I'm talking to somebody, I'm not going to call them by their unpreferred pronoun because that's rude, right? But if I'm talking about politics and my stance on it, and should I have to change how I go about talking to somebody because of how they feel, or should I feel that I'm going to get locked up for quote unquote hate speech? No, I think that's absolutely totally immoral and not correct whatsoever. But going back to my point, where I was talking to somebody at work today about it, and they were like, oh, well, you're just a hater. Like, you just, you're just ignorant. And I'm like, no, dude, like, I just think that you can't alter basic biology. You know what I mean?
It's almost just based on what you're saying. It sounds like it's more like, I'm going to provide an example right here. Say you're a Hispanic, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you just say, you know what? Today I feel like being African American.
Yeah, I mean, essentially.
Like, how's that make any sense?
No, or like, right, another.
But hold up. So here's my thing on that, right?
Yeah.
If that Hispanic wants to somehow, for whatever reason, wants to say he's an African American, I would personally look at him like, yo, dude, okay, man, whatever. But I wouldn't care as much, right? I probably just like have an initial thought, but then I wouldn't care because he's not affecting me in any way. Right. However, if he wants me to literally call him an African American, it would literally go against what makes sense to me and what's logical.
Right, and that's the dangerous thing, though, James, because what's happening is it's happening a lot in Canada right now, where people are getting locked up for quote unquote hate speech. It actually exists in America today. You can't use hate speech, or you can get charged or criminalized for it, right? But anywhere in the First Amendment where it talks about freedom of speech, and nowhere in there does it say you can speak, everything can be freedom of speech except for hate speech, or except for you can't call someone a pronoun. Freedom of speech is freedom of speech. So what I'm getting at is, like, essentially, if you're demanding me call you by your pronoun, or I'm facing criminal charges, then no, I'm not going to go out to the government and say, hey, government, I think that transgenders, right? Do I think that they need to be federally law stated that everyone has to use their pronouns for them? No, I think that's absolutely ludicrous. I think that is absolutely ludicrous. Telling me to alter my freedom of speech because of how you feel? No, I just won't do it. Again, like I said, I'm not going to be rude if I'm out in public and I see somebody and I accidentally call a transgender a male, even though that person believes that they are a female. Mm-hmm. Then I will call them by a female. You know what I'm saying? But I'm not going to address it politically and say that person is a female. I'm going to say biologically that person is a male. You know what I'm saying? Okay. Or if we're having a discussion about it and you ask me, hey, do you believe that gender is malleable? Then I'm not going to, I can't agree with that. But that just goes into the whole logic versus emotion, because you go and you ask a transgender person, like, do you think it should be a law for somebody to call you by your proper pronoun? And I can't speak for all of them, but I would say a lot of them would probably say yes. You know what I'm saying? Especially even the person that I'm talking about at work, he was like, yeah, I mean, I don't care. Like, if yeah, I think you should. Okay, so you're literally in the military fighting for our freedoms, but you're totally disregarding the First Amendment. You're like, okay, freedom, like, there's a line drawn for freedom of speech for you. Not saying that I would go out and, say like, oh yeah, and it's not like I'm saying like, oh yeah, transgenders are like the devil. Like, that's not what I'm saying. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, that would be that would be awful. That would be completely and totally uncalled for and unjust. But it's still freedom of speech. If I wanted to do that, I should be able to go say that. I obviously would not, because I don't believe that. You know what I'm saying? But if I wanted to go say that, then I should be able to say that logically. You know what I'm saying? What do you think?
I have two thoughts, right? The first one is hate speech, right? Now, the First Amendment says freedom of speech, and whether it's right or not, if people want to go out there and just spread, say, Nazi signs and just talk about Nazis and whatnot, they have the right to do that.
Absolutely.
Whether you like it or not, right? Whether I like it or not, it doesn't matter. Unless if they are physically harming somebody else or doing something where it is affecting the public as a whole, as in say they're setting buildings on fire or something, yeah, no, they gotta stop. But if they're just peacefully protesting and holding up signs, then they can do that.
Yeah.
Because that's what the First Amendment
protects.
Yeah, protects and represents.
Yeah.
Now, the second thing is, when you said that transgenders, when you said that they felt like they want us to address them a certain way, right?
Right.
I think at that point it's just a little bit of entitlement. And the reason why I say that is, say, and I could be right or wrong, but this is just an analogy, right?
Yeah.
Say you were raised by a wealthy family. You're, say, like a 14-year-old girl or something, right? That 14-year-old girl thinks that she is above everyone else and is demanding everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
She demands to be treated with respect. She demands to receive what she wants based off of her emotion or how she feels, right? Or what she thinks she deserves. So in a way, I think that is entitlement. A little bit of it, at least, right?
Yeah. There's a really interesting statistic that says what you just said is not the normal.
What's not the normal?
That the majority, or like the 14-year-old girl that grew up in a wealthy family, is going to feel like entitled.
What is it?
That suicide rates in wealthy families and higher society standings is much higher, by I think 40% actually. The majority of these suicides are coming from, which is another interesting statistic that I won't really touch on, but the suicide rate for transgender is 40%.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you're a transgender, you have a 40% chance of suicide, or at least contemplating or carrying out, which that goes into a whole other subject.
All right. So in an argument, which one makes more sense? Emotional arguments or logical arguments?
I mean, you can ask me a million times. I'll give you the same answer. Logic every time. At least for me personally.
Yeah, I would have to say logic as well. But hear this, right? So I pulled up this website, right? And here's the definition of an emotional argument / appeal. An emotional appeal uses the manipulation of emotions rather than valid logic to win an argument. Emotional appeal is a logical fallacy whereby a debater attempts to win an argument by trying to get an emotional reaction from the opponent and audience. Now, say you were having an argument with this debater, right? And he pulls emotional appeal on you / argument, right?
Right.
He wins his argument. Is he still right?
No, I would probably call him out on it. I'd probably say your logic or your argument is emotional based and does not provide any factual data whatsoever.
Fair enough. With that being said, a lot of people think that they can win arguments by appealing to emotions, but even if you do manage to appeal to the emotions of others, your opponents / audience, in reality, logic still triumphs emotion in an argument, depending on what you're trying to prove, right?
Yeah.
Thoughts?
I think for the majority of people, right, and this goes into a study that James and I both looked heavily into. You guys can look into it yourself. It's called the Myer Briggs, right? If you look up personality types and you kind of understand the fundamentals of what it is, it shows that the majority of people are emotional and feeling types, right? Mm-hmm. With that being said, I think that if the majority of people are feeling and emotional types, feeling and sensing types, again, those are terms used by the Myer Briggs. Again, we'll link it. That way, you guys can do some research if you want to do that. We probably will bring it up multiple times throughout our journey together. But the majority of people are feeling and sensing type, or quote unquote emotional people. So I would say for the majority of people, someone that's using an emotional appeal or an emotional argument, I think that would work. However, I think when presented with logical, factual data, that you kind of can put a barrier straight down in the middle, where it's like, okay, this is only going to get you so far, because statistics show that you are absolutely incorrect. But here's the thing. If you're going to use a logical appeal, you better have your shit straight. You better have your numbers. You better have your data. That way, if someone does try to pull an emotional card, you can get the rest of your audience to where you're coming from, right? And because if you don't have that, because I would say it's probably much easier to pull somebody's emotions, because it is more powerful. Kind of going back to what we were talking about, emotions are more powerful because emotions appeal to even the most logical person. Those things still exist, right? And we're getting ready to go into history and historical leaders that use emotional pull to control nations, right? Nations, man, right? So that's kind of where I'm coming from, right? Yeah. Where because the majority of the population are feelers and sensing types or emotional types, that emotional appeals and emotional arguments are going to be highly effective as opposed to logical data. Unless you have, again, all the facts right there. Boom. Okay, so here we go. We're going to jump into history and historical leaders, right? Main freaking guy I think of every single time. Not justifying what he did, Hitler. Mm-hmm. Dude. Absolutely, if you were to look up evil genius, I think that Hitler should definitely be right there, right? Because not only was I think he got too caught up in his own emotions and his own strive for power, but he was so good at speaking to people, he could be like, hey, these 10 people, go jump off a cliff, and he probably would, because he's so good at pulling to those emotional strings. I mean, you can't be, you have to be a certain kind of individual to tell an entire nation of people to target one specific person or religion, right? Like, I mean, that's almost unheard of, right? It's not totally unheard of, but that has very rarely happened throughout human history. I mean, little people have tried, to do that, right? That never really accomplished what Hitler accomplished. Because if you really look at it, I think Germany conquered, I think they're 4th or 5th in total world domination, or closest to total world domination, right? They're like 5th, maybe, right? That's absolutely crazy. But kind of going away from the evil genius side, right? You look at great leaders like Martin Luther King, Abraham Lincoln. There's just so many examples of these great historical figures, great historical leaders. And here's the thing, James. One thing that you brought up earlier, right? One of the things that I brought up earlier is there's a difference between a leader and a boss. Mm-hmm. I think that in order to be that, to engrave your name so deeply into history, you have to fundamentally have a very high level of EQ, which is emotional intelligence, and IQ, which we'll just call intelligence. And I think that combination of the two, I think, makes for a world-class leader, right? That truly makes a mark and truly engraves his name into history. If you can name one historical figure that didn't have either or, then feel free. You know what I mean?
'Now I would have to say that the leaders that played to the people's emotions were a lot more effective just because they were more emotional people. People naturally are emotional human beings, right?
Yeah, we all are.
Emotional beings. Now, that being said, they, of course, had more of a pull towards the people when playing with their emotions rather than strict logic. I think even today, even for, say, elections, right? People are still using emotions to try to get people to vote for whoever, right? What do you think?
I think that, yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I'm not going to dive too far into that because that displays a huge part of last week's episode, right? Where media is like shoving their agenda down your throat, and we absolutely eat it up like cupcakes. I think that's heavily influenced. So yes, totally agree. All right, so James, any final thoughts?
Well, I do think that I appeal more to the logical side of things, but I do understand that emotions are just as much of an important factor into today's life. Emotions are so important to the way people think and the way people do things, but I do think that you have to be fully aware of your emotions in order to be able to capitalize on your life.
Yeah, so I mean, in conclusion, on my side, I think that every decision we make, whether that's our purpose in life, whether that's what we want to do as entrepreneurs, whether that be trying to pursue religion and become a pastor, or whatever. There's always some kind of emotional fueling to every decision we make. Such as, just a quick example, right? We both want to be entrepreneurs, right? Why do we want to be entrepreneurs? In summary, in conclusion, I know I've said that a few times now, but in conclusion, right? No one does something for nothing. It doesn't exist. I've had this ideology for a while, right? Where let's say you're a rich guy, right? Let's say you have tons and tons of money and you could give it away to charity, and you decide, okay, I'm going to donate $5 million to charity. Well, there's two reasons you're either going to do that. One, you're going to either do it for the tax write-off, or you're going to do it because it gives you some sort of fulfillment or some sort of feeling of contribution to changing somebody or multiple people's lives, right? And so my ideology is that everybody is selfish, right? Because you don't do something for absolutely nothing. I don't believe that exists. If in the comment section you would like to just prove my theory, feel free. I encourage it. And then we could have a quick little debate in the comment section, right? Which I highly encourage. I would love that for you guys to be involved like that. But yeah, what do you think, James? In conclusion,
I agreed with what you said about the last part, right? The last part in regarding to nobody does anything for nothing, because even if you don't want anything, you are getting something back in return, whether you want it or not.
Hopefully you guys enjoyed tonight's episode. We have to wrap it up. Runtime's running a little bit longer than what we'd like, but definitely highly encourage you guys, if you like tonight's episode, drop a comment, drop a review in the comment section down below. Let us know your thoughts. Let us know your feedback. Not only that, but if you guys have any questions for us, please comment, reach out, DM, private message, whatever you guys have available to you. Let us know your feedback so we can continue to grow and make this a better podcast for you and everybody else. With that being said, please go follow our social medias on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook if you're not already. And that pretty much closes it up for tonight in the garage.
As always, take care, guys.
All right, guys, that's it. Have a good night.
Peace.